This paddleboarder went missing. Search crews found her dead. Then this case took a major twist. Police in Maine now say her death was a homicide and they are on the hunt for her killer. We are following a murder mystery that has put people on edge in the heart of New England. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. If you watch Law&Crime, you follow true crime, you certainly join us for On the Case, you know that murder can happen anywhere. And even though it's cliche, I will say it, that murders typically don't happen in the place that we're talking about today. This is Sunshine Stewart. People called her Sunny. She was 48 years old and just a lover of the outdoors and spent so much time exploring the wilderness in Maine. She was found dead roughly a week ago after she went missing paddleboarding. This is the pond where she was paddleboarding. It's called Crawford Pond in Union, Maine, which is a community, small town, less than 2,500 people. It's about an hour and a half away from Portland, Maine, and a 3-hour drive from Boston. Before I get into the clues that detectives may have in this case, let's start with the circumstances surrounding Sunny Stewart's disappearance. This is what we know. Police say on the evening of July 2nd, so roughly about a week ago, Sunny went paddleboarding at night. Police believe it was between 6 and 9 p.m. on Crawford Pond. Her friend told a local newspaper in Maine called the Mid-Coast Villager that Sunny was planning to spend the summer in a camper at the Micmac campground, which is on the north side of Crawford Pond, has access to the water. You can see it on this map. Now, the owner of the campsite posted on Facebook these pictures of law enforcement at the campsite and on the water. Her campsite, she says, is not a crime scene. She said she's not doing media interviews, but not only is law enforcement using her campsite, she has been cooperative in the investigation and in speaking with them. Police were called on July 2nd after Sunny didn't return to the Micmac campsite. Before dawn the next morning, Maine State Police, which were called in overnight to try and find Sunny Stewart, say they found her body on the north side of the pond near an island. Maine State Police said that Sunny was murdered, but at this point, they're not releasing her cause of death, and frankly, it's unclear why. We'll dive into that a little bit more in a moment. We do know that an autopsy determined that her death was a homicide, and when Sunny's body was found, police say the circumstances led them to call in their major crimes unit. So it appears that it was apparent that the kind of case police were dealing with was not just a missing paddleboarder or potentially an accidental death, but they say this was a murder. Now, it's unclear if police have any suspects or whether the community is still considered in danger. Maine State Police did write, quote, "Members of the public are encouraged to remain aware of their surroundings and report any suspicious behavior to law enforcement." Friends described Stewart as a free spirit. Again, she loved the outdoors. She had a tattoo that read, "If you don't like your life, change it." It appears that Stewart lived alone, according to friends who spoke with the Mid-Coast Villager. She actually lived in a house that they say she rebuilt in Tennant's Harbor, Maine, which is about a half hour away from Union and Crawford Pond, where she was murdered, according to police. Union is also where she grew up, the outlet says. Now, the friend also said that Sunny only had been at the campground for a couple days before her death. And when you look at the map, you can see that island in the middle of the pond. That is 100-acre island. According to the Mid-Coast Villager, that island is a nature preserve. People can camp there, but only with permission from the land trust that runs the island. It is open to the public during the day, but an interesting piece of information about this pond is that there's no public access to Crawford Pond. The shoreline is all privately owned by either people who have homes there or by the campsite that Sunny was reportedly staying at. Join us now to help us break down this investigation is the host of the Gold Shields podcast and former NYPD detective Tom Smith. Always great to have you on Law&Crime. Very bizarre case here, certainly in a place that typically doesn't see this type of crime, but this paddleboarder just goes out and then she winds up, according to police, being murdered. What does your gut tell you right now about what potentially could have happened?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that could be running through people's minds and my mind as well. The first thing that popped up that I was very curious about in just the reporting was the autopsy was not going to be made public as far as the cause of death. That leads me to believe that they're looking into other things, or it is a strange way that she died. Normally it would come right out with, okay, this was the cause of death and that was the cause of death. And there's always a reason in my mind, because I did it. There's a reason for holding things back. And at this moment, I don't know what it is, but that was the first thing that jumped out to me, that the report was not going to be made public, or her cause of death was.
What are some of the reasons, and we're speculating on this, but what are some of the reasons that you would not release the cause of death, but say it was a homicide?
The main reason would be that they may be linking it to other deaths and other homicides, and the cause of death was pretty extreme or rare, that may be linked to other deaths in that area. So there's a coordinated effort maybe going on with other departments and checking, mysterious homicides or unsolved homicides so far, and finding out that cause of death and linking it maybe to this one.
Wow, to think of where this story could go. As far as specifically related to Sonny Stewart, she goes out on a paddle boat. And one thing that stood out to me, paddleboard, was that this is not a public access beach. And the fact it's a pond, it's a contained area. Specifically the body of water that she was in. It's not like the ocean, where there can be so many variables. But one thing that also stood out to me is that there's no public access to getting to the water. You either have to own a house or you're in this campground. How does that factor into how the investigators go about this search?
Oh, it narrows their field down dramatically. When you're talking about a public access, that is anyone, and I truly mean anyone. When you have this kind of limited access, it does narrow it down to finding out, maybe, is there membership cards that are involved in accessing that area? Who's in that area? Cell hits of cell phones that are on at that time in that area. So it dramatically, Chris, narrows the field down for an investigator to start really pounding away at one particular area.
How do you go about when you are pounding away? I mean, specifically, what are you looking for that can help you understand who might have been in the area at the time that this happened?
Yeah, you know what? A lot of it has to do with the victim, and going into victimology is what we call it, of her pattern. What does she do every day? How often does she go there? And then going into her social media account and seeing were there any strange communications she had with anyone. Hey, I go to that lake too. Let's meet up. Anything along those lines, any relationship she's had with anyone in that area that has access to that lake. That'd be the first thing I'd be doing. Looking for bad guys is one thing, but a lot of times looking into the victim leads you to the bad guy because of a relationship or some sort of communication she may have had with someone in that area.
As far as the autopsy not being released, and whatever the reason may be for that, the other thing that stood out to me was that she was found, I think, sometime before dawn. And law enforcement had been called in about 1 o'clock in the morning, and it was written by Maine State Police that the major crimes unit was called once her body was found, which tells me that the way that she died, that there was something apparent, that this was not a drowning or something that could have been accidental. What does that tell you?
Yeah, absolutely. When you bring in other resources to help out in the investigation, it's the expertise of that particular department that's intriguing. What are they looking at, and what other cases do they have that they're looking at that may match up with this? So that is a specific detail that should intrigue a lot of people of other agencies getting involved in an investigation.
What does a major crimes unit bring to the table that other units involved in the search may not have?
Experience, for sure. Number one, when you deal with small towns, not to put down small towns, but if they're not actively involved in numerous investigations like this, you call in people who've done it before and have a track record of homicide investigations. The other thing that they bring is resources. They probably have a tremendous amount of resources that they can tap into with scuba, aviation, technical support, and also the power of whatever DA's office is in that area. If they're dealing with them a lot because of past cases, you want a strong DA involved in this when and if you arrest somebody.
And one thing too, not to put down small towns, and everybody wants to live in a place where murder does not regularly happen. And Maine is a place like that. I mean, they certainly have had issues, like I think of the mass shooting in Lewiston, Maine. So you do have some experience in terms of handling very serious crimes, like what they're dealing with here in the Sonny Stewart case. But um, how do those major crimes units in places that are more rural, the places that don't regularly see crimes like this, how do we as the public know that they're prepared to investigate this case compared to a department in a place like New York or Chicago or the communities that do unfortunately see violence on a more regular basis?
Yeah, and that's the key part. It's not like you said, not putting anyone down, but you want the best available to investigate, big crimes and violent crimes. And if you have one particular agency that's better at it because of the experience they have, that's what you want. But here's the one thing that small towns have that a bigger department or investigative body like the state police won't have. They have a knowledge of the area. That's why they have to work together. They know the people, they know different tendencies, they know cars, they know neighborhoods. So that's where the bond of working a case like this is important because you're kind of tapping into both areas. The expertise of doing an investigation and then the expertise of the people who know that area and the people who are there.
And as far as Sonny Stewart, she was staying at this campground. And apparently that campground has been cooperative, or at least they're saying on social media they've been cooperative. But that's where the staging area has been for law enforcement to then investigate in the waters. But that's a very transient place of where people may be on vacation, people who maybe seems like Sonny Stewart was going to be spending the summer in a camper so she could experience the outdoors, which she loved. Um, what type of challenges could you face at a campsite that you might not if this happened in an apartment building?
Oh, a tremendous amount. Just the cross contamination of any evidence that might be there. That's where the tricky part comes into with automobiles, with bicycles, with motorcycles, with all that just running all over, potential evidence that's in that area. But what you want to do in areas like that, Chris, is just talk to people. Evidence collection would be very rough to do, but more important is talking to people who are there. When's the last time you saw her? Was she with anybody? What was her actions like? What was her demeanor like? When you had spoken to her. So in interviews are very important when it comes to that because everyone, someone saw her. Someone had an interaction with her beforehand. So those are the people you need to find.
Yeah, and it was a private campsite too. So you would assume, like a hotel, that people checked in, they checked out, and that campsite would have information. I think of the interviews, and I always love talking to you about the interview process, whether it's an interrogation or in a case like this. What stands out to you when you're interviewing someone who maybe says, "Yeah, I saw her. She went out paddleboarding, and yeah, didn't see her again." But when you're having that conversation with someone who might be saying that they didn't really know her, but your radar is up looking for a potential suspect, what are some of the things you're looking for in that conversation?
That's a great question. And it depends on how they're saying it and what they're saying about her. If they have, if they come across of someone just at the campground, but yet knows a little bit too much about her, that's something to key on. So it's a matter of just understanding words and how they're putting it together. But the other thing is leading on, you want to create a timeline. And that's the biggest thing when it comes to investigations like this is creating a timeline. So if you have to pick out multiple people who I saw her up till this point, then you want to find someone who picks it up from that point on and continues. So you want to set a timeline up. But as far as someone's actions, or demeanor when they're speaking about this, to an investigator who's been doing it a long time, those little things are going to pop out. Are they interested in the investigation? Hey, do you have anyone in mind? Are you looking at anyone? Is there any evidence around? Questions like that always raise a red flag when you're speaking to someone who's a little bit too much into the investigation. So those are things that you want to key on.
And then once you have those conversations as a team, do you meet at the end of the day? I mean, how do you exchange information where if there's just something that stood out to you about someone they talked to, and I don't know if this person exists, but how is that information relayed to the team that maybe we should start thinking about this person?
Oh, it's immediate. If something's not right, and you have that again sixth sense of as an investigator and experience, if it's something immediate, everyone's getting called right away, and you're going to kind of turn your attention maybe to someone to go into their background and where are they. So interviews can lead to immediate actions depending on the information you're getting from other people. But if they're just general information, normally after an hour, after a few hours or whatever, the team will get together, piece together the interviews, and that's where you set your timeline up of who saw her when and when it leads off, and who's picking it up from there.
And then I want to talk about this pond. And so her body was apparently found. There's where she entered at like the north side of the pond, where she entered with her paddleboard, and then there's this island in the middle that's owned by a nature preserve, or oversaw by a nature preserve. Limited camping on the island, they say, and then it's not something that, again, you need public or private access to be able to even get to the pond in the first place. And I don't know if you'd be able to answer this because just off the top of my head, if her body was found on the pond in the island in the middle, would that mean that that's where she was potentially murdered?
No, not at all. Because of the easy transportation of a waterway or a paddleboard or a boat, whatever might be there, that's where she's found. That doesn't necessarily mean, that's where it occurred. But to great crime scene work, they're going to make that determination pretty quick because of the positioning of the body, any, mud trails, any footprint, anything around there. How is the area disturbed? So really good crime scene work can probably determine whether she was dumped there or that's where the crime happened.
How challenging is it to do it in a pond, to investigate a crime in a pond? Because I do think of something, to your point, like a mud trail, or if that the water and the soil, it being a place where a footprint would be a little bit more prevalent than on concrete, but at the same time you have water. What are some of the challenges, but also potential benefits and benefits is a tough word when talking about murder, but when you're trying to investigate a case, what is that environment like for you?
Yeah, what, Chris? It's a great question because it's a little of both. If you have something that falls out of someone's pocket or something's left there, being that it's mud or a dense area, can stay there. It's not going to move. It's not going to blow away. So that may be a benefit to crime scene investigators. But the other part is, like you said, water. Just water being all over the place, the humidity, all of that plays a part and is a nightmare for crime scenes when you're dealing with something like that. But it could be a little of both. And the other thing I wanted to bring out was the advent and how prevalent it is for everyone to record themselves when they're doing something. So there may be a push also to get any recordings of people on their paddleboards, on their boats, and look in the background to see if there's any potential of seeing her in an area with someone or approaching that area where she was found. So, cell phones and recordings are also going to play a part in this.
And so law enforcement believes that she went out paddleboarding between 6 and 9 p.m. And then they're called in around 1 o'clock the next morning because she hadn't returned to this campsite. And then her body was found at some point before daybreak the next day. Knowing that and the damage that water can do to a body when you're trying to investigate it, and it wasn't a long period of time of several days, but in the course of several hours, what type of damage can water do to a body when you're trying to get information from it about what might have happened?
Yeah, just a couple of hours. It should be okay. Doing the pathology report and doing the autopsy should be okay after just a couple of hours. Depending on, again, where she's positioned, how much of her body was in the water, anything like that. So a lot of it's going to play into that. But like I said in the beginning of this, holding on to the report is interesting. The why they're doing that is what intrigues me, and getting an answer to that is going to be, I think, very important to the overall investigation of this.
And then just lastly, there is a tip line that Maine State Police put out. How do you sift through? I mean, even if it's in a small area, but you're getting all of these, I'm sure, text messages and tips. What's the process of figuring out what is a legitimate lead that you need to follow?
Yeah, well, you know what? They're gonna follow them all up, because you have to remember someone might not be articulate enough to really explain something until you're face to face with them. So if it's an email, hey, I know about this, or even a phone call, people get nervous, talking on the phone and explaining something. So all of those leads are going to be followed up, because there's nothing like sitting in front of somebody in an area where they're comfortable and talking to them about something. So most of them, if not all of them, are going to be run down.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see how this case continues to play out. Certainly happening in an area that you typically don't see this type of violence, but hopefully they can find someone and hold them responsible for the death of Sonny Stewart. Tom Smith, it's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with me.
Always a pleasure, Chris. Thanks so much.
Before we go, I want to put this up on the screen. Maine State Police are looking to the public for information as they're searching for Sunshine Stewart's killer. This is the tip line that Maine State Police have launched. You can either call this number or text MESTIP, MESS TIP, to 847-411. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.